There are moments that don't need gunfire to ignite a war. Sometimes all it takes is a table. A table was reserved, then stripped away by a polished smile. A mother in a simple black dress, her wrist trembling slightly as she adjusted her pearl bracelet. A birthday evening, not with flowers, not with cake, just the wish to sit where her son had planned for her, overlooking Star Lake as it caught the sunset like shattered glass. Instead, she was led to a table in the kitchen, near the smell of frying oil and the clatter of busy staff, because a white woman had just walked in, carrying with her the kind of power the world is taught to bow to. The restaurant's name was Royal Sky Lounge, a place where elegance was defined by skin tone, and the right to be served depended on how easily your name rolled off a waiter's tongue. Her name was Vivian Monroe, a retired nurse, a mother who had spent 30 years in emergency rooms, wearing scrubs and surviving white nights beside patients who couldn't speak for themselves. She didn't hold power, but her son did. His name was Elijah Monroe, the CEO of Monroe Dynamics, a multinational tech company reshaping the city's future. He didn't like cameras or titles, but he knew how to be silent and how to watch. That evening, when Vivian Monroe stepped out of the restaurant with her heart tightening in her chest, she called her son, not to cry, not to complain, but to recount what seemed like a small thing. There wasn't a table with my name on it, Elijah. A single sentence, and a system began to quake. Because there are men who don't need to slam fists on tables to be heard. They just need to reclaim one on behalf of their mother. And the world, in its arrogance, has no choice but to follow. The entrance to Royal Sky Lounge shimmered like a windless lake, golden lights casting a soft hue across the polished granite tiles. It was a warm March evening. Spring had just brushed past Austin, gentle enough to leave coats behind, crisp enough to crave something warm on the plate. A silver Bentley rolled to the curb. The chauffeur stepped out and opened the door with quiet grace, and Vivian Monroe stepped onto the sidewalk. She wore a neat, understated black dress and nude flats. Nothing flashy, no need to stand out. Today marked her 67th birthday, and her only son had arranged a private dinner, an offering of quiet in a world that often shouted too loudly. "Thank you, Thomas," she nodded to the driver. A nurse at heart, Vivian had long developed the habit of nodding at everyone. Her kindness wasn't for show. It was stitched into the invisible uniform of someone who once held patients' hands through pain no one else could see. Today, she wore no badge, but she carried her dignity. Royal Sky Lounge, with its curved glass facade overlooking Star Lake, was the city's crown jewel of dining, booked months in advance, where regulars were greeted by name. Through the glass, she could see crystal lights dripping from the ceiling, tuxedos floating like rivers of silk, and the subtle hum of jazz flowing from a grand piano in the corner. Vivian stepped inside. The door opened, and the doorman offered a nod, not warm, just practiced. She walked through the lobby straight to the host's stand. The hostess, a blonde woman in her 20s, dressed in a Bordeaux red suit, with a smile like a sticker, looked up. "Good evening. I have a reservation under Vivian Monroe. Window table, overlooking the lake. My son booked it for me 3 weeks ago." The hostess typed, retyped, glanced at her leather-bound notebook. A flicker of awkwardness crossed her face before being replaced by a polished, professional "I'm sorry" smile. "I don't see your name here. Maybe there's been a mix-up in the date or restaurant." Vivian tightened her grip on her purse strap. She had swallowed enough questions like that in her life. But her voice remained calm. There's no mistake. Elijah Monroe reserved it. VIP table, lake view. A figure approached. Graham Kessler, the manager. Tall, silver hair slicked back, gray suit, and a smile too perfect to be sincere. "What's going on, Clara?" "She says there's a VIP reservation under Monroe, but it's not showing in our system." Graham's eyes flicked from head to toe. No recognition in them, only assessment. Shoes, dress, skin tone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe. That table has long been reserved by one of our regulars, Ms. Charlotte Langford. Perhaps your son was mistaken." Charlotte Langford. Her name glided through the lounge like a royal decree. Right then the door opened again and Charlotte walked in, blonde hair in a perfect bun, deep red Versace dress, a familiar silhouette from local fashion covers, and the top of Austin's Arts Foundation donors list. Graham all but abandoned Vivian to welcome Charlotte like royalty, his voice suddenly reverent. "Charlotte, welcome. Your table is ready, by the window just as you like it." Charlotte glanced at Vivian, then looked away, as if she were merely a shadow cast on the marble floor. Vivian stood still, not angry, not broken, just smaller. It was as if she were back in the hospital's HR office in 1993, where a manager once asked if she was sure she could lead a night shift, without saying the word black. "Mr. Graham," she said slowly, her voice low but firm, "I know my son. He didn't make a mistake." Graham's smile thinned. "We can arrange a table by the kitchen. Not the most comfortable, but it's open." Before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Sorry, but I saw the name Monroe in the book this morning." Malcolm Price, a young black server in uniform, stepped from behind the counter. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. His eyes flicked to Graham, then back to Vivian. "VIP table, 7 p.m., Monroe. I remember because I was told to prep the Dom Perignon." Graham froze, then turned to Malcolm, teeth tight. "Get back to the kitchen. This isn't your concern." Vivian took a deep breath. "It's all right," she said softly. "I'll leave." Graham shrugged and turned away. Charlotte Langford was already being escorted to the table, her table. Malcolm caught Vivian's eye as she passed. That look, silent, was the only apology he could give. Stepping out of the restaurant, Vivian let her hands tremble. She pulled out her phone. Just one sentence. "Elijah, my table didn't have my name." That was enough, and the current beneath the surface began to stir. The city of Austin moved like a slow jazz melody that evening. Gentle, slightly tense, needing no explanation. Along the western boulevard, the sun dipped behind the horizon and cast warm, honeyed gold across the mirrored waters of Star Lake. The silver Bentley glided to a stop in front of the Royal Sky Lounge, the pinnacle restaurant perched on the 37th floor of Landmark Tower, where $100 million deals were often sealed with a handshake and a glass of 35-year-old vintage wine. Vivian Monroe placed her hand on the car door just as her chauffeur stepped out. She adjusted the ash-gray silk scarf around her neck and took a deep breath. Every step away from the vehicle felt like stepping onto a stage, though she'd never liked any stage in her life. "Thank you, Thomas." She nodded to the driver, the only person who consistently opened her door with a smile free of prejudice. At 67, Vivian was no longer surprised by the appraising glances. With her amber-toned skin, slender frame, wrapped in a simple black dress, and neat kitten heels, she wasn't trying to fit in. She simply wanted dinner, and this was her birthday dinner, booked in advance by her son, Elijah Monroe. Elijah, the founder and CEO of Monroe Dynamics, a powerhouse of tech and cross-sector investment, once dubbed by Forbes as the silent strategist reshaping the South's economic infrastructure. But today, there were no boardrooms, no summits, no deals, only a window seat for the woman he cherished most. Vivian touched the pearl necklace around her neck, a gift Elijah had given her 5 years ago when she retired after 43 years as a nurse. Not the most expensive jewelry she owned, but the only one she always wore, because engraved on the back were the words, "For everything you carried, so I could fly." As she entered the restaurant lobby, light from the crystal ceiling spilled down like a quiet rain. The soft piano notes floated above the refined air. The pearl-colored tiles beneath her feet mirrored every step she took. Vivian approached the reception desk. The hostess looked up. Clara, blonde, about 25, dressed in a sharply tailored Bordeaux-red uniform. Her eyes swept over Vivian, from her neat curls to the real leather clutch, then paused to just slightly on her darker complexion. Vivian smiled calmly. "Good evening, I have a reservation. Vivian Monroe, VIP table by the window. My son made it in advance." Clara glanced down at the touch screen and tapped a few keys. Her brow furrowed. She tried again, flipped to a crocodile leather-bound ledger, then looked up. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see a reservation under that name. Perhaps there's been a mistake with the date. Or—" "No mistake," Vivian interrupted gently. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. "Elijah Monroe, VIP table, 7 p.m. At that moment, Graham Kessler, the restaurant's general manager, walked over. He wore a smoky Ermenegildo Zegna suit and stood tall, with salt and pepper hair swept back. He didn't ask any questions, just glanced at Clara, then turned to Vivian. "My apologies, ma'am, but that VIP table has already been reserved this evening by one of our regular guests. It's likely there was a misunderstanding with whoever made the booking." Vivian tightened her grip on her purse. No misunderstanding. Elijah Monroe booked it for his mother's birthday. The moment she said Elijah Monroe's name, Graham's eyes twitched briefly, like a small internal jolt, but he quickly composed himself. "I understand, but unfortunately we don't have your name in our system. We could seat you near the kitchen. It doesn't have the lake view, but it's still quite comfortable." She hadn't yet responded when the revolving door turned open. Charlotte Langford appeared like a walking statement of privilege. She wore a sleek white dress, her hair in a high bun, and a limited-edition Hermes bag in hand. Accompanied by her assistant, she entered to a wave of hushed murmurs. Langford, the senator's daughter. Graham instantly left Vivian's side to greet Charlotte, his smile curving into a perfect U. "Charlotte, your table is ready, as always, by the window." Vivian looked on. It was the table she had reserved. Clara couldn't quite hide the flicker of discomfort in her gaze. Charlotte glided past Vivian as though she were a marble statue in a museum. Still Vivian stood her ground. "Excuse me," she called out. "You just said the VIP table was already reserved, but I just watched you give it to Ms. Langford, who clearly walked in without a prior reservation." Graham turned back, his smile relaxing into something more strained. "Mrs. Monroe, I've already explained. There may have been an error. If you're dissatisfied, you're welcome to leave." No one said a word, but the surrounding tables had fallen silent. Just then, Malcolm Price, a young black waiter, stepped out from the staff area. "Sorry, but I checked the reservation book this morning. There's a Monroe, 7 p.m., table 5 by the window." The entire lounge seemed to pause. Graham turned to Malcolm, his voice clipped and threatening. "You looking to get fired?" Vivian inhaled slowly. She'd heard enough threats like that in her life. "It's all right, young man," she said softly. "I'll go." Graham shrugged, as though relieved. Clara quickly looked down at her desk. Vivian turned and began walking out. But just before she reached the exit, she stopped. Not because she needed to look back, but because she needed to call someone. She took out her phone, tapped on a name so familiar that she didn't need to see it. Elijah. His voice came through after 2 rings. "You there already, Mom?" Vivian glanced up at the strip of lights on the ceiling. Her voice softened, almost hollow. "Elijah, they told me. There was no name under mine. Charlotte Langford is sitting at the table I reserved." Silence. Only the sound of wind sweeping off the lake brushed against her hand. "He said you must have gotten the date wrong, then offered me a table by the kitchen." Another pause. Then Elijah responded, slow, each word cutting like stone. "All right, Mom, go home. I'll take care of it." Vivian ended the call. Her hands began to tremble, not from fear, but because something had been touched. The 54th floor of Sterling Tower cast its shadow over the glowing avenues of Houston like a silent giant. Inside a marble-floored office, Xavier Sterling stood before a glass wall, stretching from floor to ceiling. The city lights behind him reflected in the glass-like lines of encrypted code. He didn't move, only gripped the phone tightly after his mother Lucille ended the call with a single, pointed sentence. "We need to talk about Highgrove Terrace." No further words were needed. He opened the file. Every page, hit like a slap against the order Highgrove Terrace, prided itself on keeping. The reservation system was edited just 45 minutes before Lucille arrived. The name Lucille Sterling was replaced with B. Lawton. Service surcharges were disproportionately applied to 83% of customers with African or Asian surnames. Internal staff notes included, "Black patrons shouldn't sit by the windows, affects overall ambiance." He closed the file, his grip tightening for a second before loosening. "Valerie." He hit the call button. The door opened in under 10 seconds. She stepped in, hair pinned high, wearing her usual neutral beige suit, but her eyes razor sharp. "What do you need?" she asked, skipping the pleasantries. "Prep the car. I'm going to Highgrove Terrace tonight." She blinked. "You want to see Preston now?" "Number, I'm not going as Xavier Sterling." Valerie tilted her head slightly. "Then you are." "Darius Wilkins," Xavier said slowly. "A financial advisor with a middle-income salary, booking a dinner to celebrate a promotion. No connections, no public profile, and black." Valerie didn't ask more. She understood. "VIP table, by the window, under the name Wilkins." She nodded. "I'll make it for the exact time Mrs. Lucille arrived. Same conditions." As she exited, Xavier stood, turning his back for the first time in years on the million-dollar skyline of Houston. 2 hours later, Xavier wore an off-the-rack blazer, worn just enough to lose its crisp lines, a white shirt with a slight crease at the cuff, a navy tie knotted just a touch off-center, scuffed black leather shoes, the same pair he wore to interviews back at Harvard. No Patek Philippe, No sterling ring, not a single trace of the man who controls 51% of Highgrove Terrace. He was just a man, brown-skinned, polite, humble, walking into a place that had already decided where he belonged the moment it saw his skin. At Highgrove Terrace, soft amber light spilled from hanging chandeliers onto gleaming hardwood floors. What they didn't know was that tonight, a man had come not merely to dine. He came to see for himself, to touch the cracks that all the polished luxury could no longer conceal. He came to witness and to document the truth of how an entire system silently categorizes its patrons, not with words, but with actions. And by the end of that night, denial would no longer live in the dark. The Houston night breeze swept down Heights Boulevard, rustling the oak trees lining the entrance of Highgrove Terrace. There, the vintage bronze lantern outside the door burned steadily, casting shadows across the polished granite tiles. Everything looked as it always did, perfect, unchanged. A place so polished it seemed untouched by time, or the world outside. Xavier Sterling stepped out of a hastily rented Toyota Camry, a far cry from the armored vehicles or private Maybachs he was accustomed to. The driver didn't recognize him. That was the point. The suit he wore wasn't bespoke Savile Row. The blazer had come from an outlet mall 3 years ago, a piece he kept only because it had accompanied him during his final presentation at Harvard Business School. Beneath it, a slightly wrinkled white cotton shirt and a simple patterned tie knotted just a little off. Intentionally, he wanted to be underestimated, because tonight every condescending glance would be evidence, every furrowed brow, every patronizing tone, every measured stare. It would all be noted. The revolving door turned. Xavier stepped into the grand lobby of Highgrove Terrace. Instantly, the air changed. Conversations dulled. A few guests looked up, surprised. A black man, well-dressed but out of place. A few eyes darted toward the manager, then back to their wine glasses. Xavier walked slowly to the host stand. A young blonde woman in her mid-20s, wearing the standard black-and-white uniform, smiled politely when she saw him, until her eyes landed on his skin. "Good evening," she said, her smile dimming slightly. "Do you have a reservation?" "Wilkins, Darius Wilkins," he replied, his voice calm, his gaze steady. She checked the reservation book. Her eyes skimmed once, then again, pausing. Yes, that's right. VIP table by the window," she read aloud, though hesitation clung to her voice. "But I'm afraid there might have been a last-minute change. I'll need to confirm with the manager. If you could wait just a moment." She turned away before he could respond. Xavier stepped aside, silent. Familiar sounds drifted in from deeper inside, the soft jazz piano, the clinking of glasses, the gentle slice of knives through tender ribeye. But through it all, he felt cold. This was where his mother had stood, at this exact time, and had been denied. He tightened his hand. Minutes later, Preston Klein appeared. As always, slicked hair, gray suit, lavender tie, the living emblem of Heights-style pride. His eyes passed over Xavier, briefly assessing a stranger. "Apologies for the wait, Mr. Wilkins?" Preston said, voice laced with faint surprise. "We had a bit of a mix-up in our system. The VIP window table was reserved a week ago by another guest. Regrettably." "Really?" Xavier offered a faint smile. "Because I just booked it yesterday, and your hostess confirmed my name's still in the book." Preston glanced quickly toward the stand. "Could have been a data entry issue, but I'm quite certain it was already spoken for." He lowered his head slightly, feigning courtesy. "We can seat you near the bar. It's cozy and very welcoming." Xavier met his eyes. "Because I'm not qualified to sit by the window. Is that it?" The air fell silent. Preston blinked. "I don't believe that's what I implied." "No, but it's what your system says every day." At that moment, a black waiter approached, holding menus. He froze for a beat when he saw Xavier, then flicked his eyes to Preston. Something passed in his glance. A quiet warning, a message without words. "Marcus Reed," Xavier asked softly. "You're the one who served table 7 last week?" The waiter flinched. Preston turned, confused. "Sir," Marcus began, voice low. "I probably shouldn't." "It's all right," Xavier cut in. "I just want to know, was it true that a guest named Lucille Sterling had her reservation cancelled without explanation, even after confirmation?" Silence. Marcus looked at Preston. "Answer," Xavier said, barely above a whisper, but his tone made the entire lobby freeze. "Yes," Marcus nodded slowly, "and she was placed at a side table near the kitchen after being told her name wasn't found." Xavier nodded. Behind him, a few guests began to murmur. A white couple at the far table started glancing around, as if realizing something beyond their entrees. "In that case," Xavier turned back to Preston, "maybe I should cut this dinner short." "Please understand," Preston began defensively, "this isn't policy." "No, you misunderstood." Xavier gently took out his phone, pressed the record button, and placed it on the table beside the flower arrangement. "I didn't come here to eat," he said, lifting his gaze. "I came to document, and starting tomorrow, Highgrove will have to answer." Highgrove Terrace, 7:02 p.m. The restaurant was a symphony of glitter and pretense. Low-hung crystal chandeliers reflecting off polished glasses, the soft clink of silverware against white porcelain, and murmured conversations laced with subtle bragging. This wasn't just a dining room. It was a stage, a place where Houston's elite displayed their taste, their status, and their belief that they belonged to the right class. Xavier Sterling, or rather, Darius Wilkins, walked in wearing an outfit deliberately plain. The woman at the reception glanced at him, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes," he replied, voice steady, calm. "Darius Wilkins, 7 o'clock, window seat." She flipped through the reservation book, eyes moving swiftly as if searching for some logical glitch that would make his name vanish. But no, Valerie had booked the table and confirmed it, thoroughly. Yes." She forced a smile. "I see it. You're a new guest." The way she emphasized new didn't escape Xavier's ears. "Is there a problem?" he asked, still calm. "No, it's just, we had a last-minute change. That window table was reassigned to one of our regulars." Xavier didn't move. "And where will I be seated?" "We have a lovely table near the bar," she said, avoiding his gaze. Very popular. With those who don't matter." "Lead the way," he said. No protest, no attitude. But inside, he was recording everything. He was guided past several empty tables, some with views, the very kind his mother had once been denied. Finally, he was seated in a tucked-away corner near the kitchen entrance, where the lighting barely allowed him to read the menu. No one looked at him for more than 3 seconds. No one asked if he needed anything. It was invisible by design. He sat, placed his hand on the tablecloth, counted each footstep that passed, and waited to see what they'd do next. 20 minutes passed. Not a single person came to take his order. He raised a hand, like any normal guest. A white waiter glanced at him from a distance, then turned away, pretending to be busy with another table. A newly arrived group of white diners was welcomed warmly, and their glasses were filled within 60 seconds. Darius Wilkins sat in silence, watching, until a quiet voice appeared beside him. "Would you like some water?" Xavier turned. A young man in his mid-20s, wearing a server uniform, stood there with a discreet but watchful expression. "Thank you," Xavier replied. "I thought I'd gone invisible." The young man gave a faint smile. "They call this the service-restricted zone." "Service-restricted?" "A nicer way of saying worse service," he whispered. "Only applies to people who don't match the decor." Xavier glanced at his name tag. Marcus Reed. He remembered the name. One of the staff flagged in Valerie's internal report. Punctual, dedicated, never promoted. Reason: doesn't fit the brand image. "Thank you, Marcus," Xavier said. Marcus paused. Something in the man's voice made him lift his head. Those eyes, too familiar with this to still be surprised. "You should be careful," Marcus murmured, then walked away. 15 minutes later, a man in a navy suit emerged from the management office, tall, silver-haired, walking like the entire restaurant belonged to him, Preston Klein. Xavier watched him sweep his eyes across the room, his gaze scanning like a security system. When he saw Marcus serving in the dim corner, his steps halted. Preston approached. No greeting, no courtesy. "Marcus," he said, voice low but pointed. "Who told you to take this table?" "No one, sir. I saw he hadn't been helped." Preston chuckled. It wasn't kind. "You're being too eager." Xavier remained silent, as if not listening, but he registered every word. "Is there a problem with your staff?" he asked, cutting through the tension like a knife. Preston hesitated, then turned. The fake smile returned. "No, sir. Wilkins, correct? Just training issues." "So a dedicated staff member gets called inexperienced," Xavier said, voice as soft as a breeze, sharp as steel. "And a customer is left waiting 35 minutes. No water, no menu, no check-in." Preston smiled nervously, trying to regain control. "Apologies for the inconvenience. Fridays get quite busy around here." "Interesting, because I see at least 5 empty tables by the window," Xavier said, pointing. Preston followed the direction of his hand, and for the first time, the polished confidence drained from his face. "You are Darius Wilkins," Xavier repeated, "but I think you know better than I do who I really am." Silence. No one said a word for 5 seconds. Then Preston adjusted his tie, reapplying his professional smile. "I'll personally make sure your experience improves." "No need," Xavier said as he stood and pulled on his coat. "I didn't come here to eat." "Then, what did you come for?" Preston asked, the corners of his smile stiffening. Xavier looked him directly in the eye. "To see if the system you protect would treat me the same way it treated my mother." Preston took half a step back. No one moved. Everything in the restaurant seemed to freeze for a beat. Xavier walked away, not fast, not slow. The glass doors of Highgrove Terrace parted. He stepped into the Euston night. Behind him, a system that once seemed unshakable had just developed its first crack. Houston, 9:42 a.m. Valerie Chen entered the executive office on the 46th floor without knocking. She held an iPad in her hand, lips pressed, her eyes carrying a storm. "Xavier, there's something you need to see. Now." Xavier Sterling stepped away from the window, leaving behind the gentle sunlight streaking through the glass like a soft blade. But what Valerie carried in her hands was anything but gentle. She placed the iPad on his desk, and opened a surveillance video from Highgrove Terrace's internal security system. One Sterling group, as a silent investor, had secret access to. Xavier said nothing, eyes fixed as the footage played back. Preston Klein, at 5:46 p.m., accessing the reservation system, deleting the name Lucille Sterling and replacing it with B. Lawton. Valerie swiped to the second clip. 7:12 p.m., Lucille standing at the host stand, Preston approaching. His face held its usual polite smile, but his eyes were cold. The young hostess, Amber, looked from Lucille to Preston, clearly waiting for a signal. A subtle nod from Preston. Then they turned the page in the reservation book together. No genuine apology, no attempt to verify, just a look that said she was asking for something that didn't belong to her. Xavier inhaled deeply, pushed his chair back, and stood. "Is there more?" "Yes," Valerie nodded. "An anonymous report. A server named Marcus Reed, the only black employee remaining on the evening shift, has filed 3 internal complaints over the past 6 months about discriminatory seating practices. All 3 were dismissed by Preston." "Is Marcus still working?" "Same position, still assigned to the kitchen-adjacent section, the lowest tip zone." Xavier gave a faint, bitter smile, kept around to color the diversity brochure. Valerie nodded. "Exactly." He turned, hands clenched into fists, but his voice didn't rise. It simply dropped lower, firmer. "Initiate an internal audit." Valerie nodded. "All of Highgrove?" "Not just financials," Xavier said. "Audit staff, behavior, guest feedback history, reservation system, every line of code, every entry." "And Preston?" Xavier raised his head. The light in his eyes wasn't from the sun. It was fire. "He won't be fired," he said slowly. "He'll be exposed, publicly, Highgrove Terrace." That night, Marcus Reed stood in the locker room loosening his tie when his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I know you told the truth. Hold your ground. Everything is about to change." "XS." Marcus froze. He looked around, then back at the screen. His hand trembled, not from fear, but because for the first time in months of endurance he felt seen. He took a deep breath, tightened his tie, and walked out. At the bar, Amber, the young hostess, was scribbling something on a notepad. When she saw Marcus, she looked up, biting her lip like she wanted to speak but didn't dare. "You saw what happened to Mrs. Lucille that night, didn't you?" Marcus asked quietly. Amber looked at him, eyes caught between fear and guilt. We were just following Mr. Klein's orders. And what if he was wrong?" Amber didn't respond, but for the first time she didn't look away. The next morning, Valerie knocked softly. "Xavier, what is it?" Marcus Reed sent in an audio recording. The night Mrs. Lucille was denied, while near the bar, Preston told staff, "Guests like her make our regulars uncomfortable. Seating them near the kitchen is the best solution." Xavier closed his eyes. He had suspected it, but hearing it aloud still cut deep. "Send the recording to legal," he said, opening his eyes, "and initiate Phase 2. Phase 2? We'll organize a secret assessment. I'll return to Highgrove as a customer, but this time not as Darius Wilkins." Valerie furrowed her brow. "Then who will you be?" Xavier met her eyes, cool and sharp. "This time, I'll be myself." Sterling Equity Group, 45th floor conference room. It was soundproof, but far from quiet. The atmosphere inside was as tense as the surface of water before a storm. Each keystroke, touch slide transition on the giant screen, felt like an undercurrent, building to a break. Valerie Chen stood before the digital board, fingers moving across the touchscreen like a conductor leading a silent symphony. But what appeared on that screen? Maps of data points, internal notes, customer demographics, was a symphony of discrimination, meticulously composed. 34 incidents, she said, voice steady like a metronome. 10 months, all with the same pattern. Xavier Sterling stood with arms crossed in the corner, eyes fixed on the screen. He nodded once. "Show me the pattern." Valerie typed a quick command. On the screen, 3 columns of data lit up in red. Guest names altered. 100% were people of color. Seating reassigned. 93% were moved from window areas to locations near the kitchen or bar. Internal notes, not aligned with brand image, may be controversial if seated in the main area. Then she opened another file, this time internal message threads between the reservations team and floor managers. One message lit up across the screen. POC guest, name J.L. Harper, with 2 guests, booked VIP, reassign. Prioritize R.L.'s group, Langford's crew. Another message, dated just 3 days before Lucille Sterling was turned away. Don't let another Lucille happen again during prime hours. Preston will go ballistic. Xavier said nothing. He didn't have to. His face alone chilled the room several degrees. "Valerie, tell me, who else besides Preston was involved in these changes?" She swiped across the system access logs and pointed to 3 names. 2 reservation assistants, Emily Rain and Brent Wood. Both approved reservation edits at least 5 times each. The other is assistant floor manager Michael Tran. He's the one who canceled Lucille's table directly. "Michael's Asian?" Xavier asked. "Yes." He went silent. Sometimes the system is bigger than skin color. This is about privilege, about position, not just race. He turned. "I want to take this one step further. Ask Marcus Reed if he's willing to meet in person." "You think he'll talk?" Valerie asked. "Marcus saw my mother get turned away and couldn't stop it," Xavier replied. "I think he's been waiting for the chance to make it right." 8:37 p.m. A small bar in Montrose. The place was called Velvet Fig, not known for celebrity sightings, no flashy neon, no intense security cameras. Marcus Reed sat in a quiet corner, slowly rotating a glass of non-alcoholic lemon soda. His eyes flicked toward the entrance again and again, until a man in a worn blazer walked in. No aura of a CEO, just a tired-eyed gentleman in a wrinkled shirt and humble posture. Xavier Sterling. No introductions were needed. They recognized each other instantly. Marcus gave a small nod. "Didn't think you'd come in person." Xavier sat. "I didn't come as a CEO. I came as a son." Silence for a few seconds. Then Marcus unlocked his phone and handed it to Xavier, showing screenshots, internal messages, shift logs, delighted reservations, and color-coded customer tags. Class A, media-friendly. Class B, neutral. Class C, potentially problematic. And under Class C, names like Sterling, Harper, Jenkins, Ngo, Ali. "I've seen this happen a lot," Marcus said quietly. "But that night, seeing your mother stand tall after being turned away, still thank them politely, still walk out like she wasn't hurt, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Xavier looked at him, his expression softening. "Thank you. But you need to know, after tonight, everything will change." "I know." Marcus nodded. "I'm ready." 11:20 p.m., 44th floor, Sterling HQ. The small war room adjacent to the data center had become Valerie's command deck. She was coordinating analysts, in-house attorneys, and IT engineers from the security division. Marcus was in a separate room, giving a full statement. Xavier entered, holding a signed report Marcus had just completed. He placed it on the table. We now have the full dossier on how Highgrove Terrace treats guests they consider off-brand. Valerie looked at him, a flash of pride in her eyes. "So what now?" she asked. "No public statements, no lawsuits yet," Xavier said. "I want them to walk into their own trap. I want to see Preston act as he always has, thinking no one's watching. But this time, we are, very closely." He turned toward the window. The light from Houston trickled across buildings like a silent jazz score. "We're not just confronting a restaurant," Xavier said softly. "We're confronting a culture masked in fine wine, white linens, and apologies with asterisks." He turned back, voice firm and deliberate. "And it's time we rewrote the menu of justice." The 45th floor conference room of Sterling Equity Group sat beneath pale overhead lights, with only Xavier and Valerie remaining between glowing LED panels. A sprawling data map stretched across the wall, red nodes marking each guest of color who had been turned away, each email that was accidentally sent, each suspicious transaction that had evaded auditing filters. Somewhere, a light jazz melody played from the in-wall speakers, a quiet irony as the room laid bare a much darker symphony, a concerto of exclusion finely orchestrated by bias and privilege. Valerie swept her hand across the touch screen. The log lines scrolled like fragments of shredded time. Guest doesn't align with marketing image. Reassign table. Notify Preston if a guest appears of African descent or not. Photogenic. Remove hashtag diversity if table photo lacks core demographic. These are internal commands from upper management accounts, Valerie said, her voice now less clinical and more like a blade, and keywords like people of color, media risk, image control repeat too often to be accidental. Xavier said nothing. His eyes traced each command, each chart. Every red dot represented someone pushed into invisibility just because they didn't fit the aesthetic Preston and his system had built. "Val," Xavier asked, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, "how many of them came in alone?" Valerie typed. 27. He nodded. "That's the weak point. Solo guests are easier to isolate and easier to displace without raising eyebrows. Just like my mother." Valerie paused. "So what are you thinking?" "Call Marcus Reed. I want to hear it directly. I need an insider's voice." 9:12 p.m. The Fable Bar, Montrose. The bar glowed with muted amber light, glass clinks, and vintage soul music folding over the city like a soft blanket pulled over something breaking. Marcus Reed sat tucked into the farthest corner, tension sharp in his jawline. His black shirt, neatly pressed, showed signs of wear at the cuffs, like the man himself, bearing too much for too long. Xavier entered quietly. No attention was drawn. He wore a charcoal wool coat, loose tie, and none of the billion-dollar CEO aura, only a man searching for a truth, long twisted. "Thanks for coming," Marcus said softly. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," Xavier replied, voice calm but unshakable. Marcus let out a small, joyless laugh. "I still remember the first time Preston told me VIP guests need to harmonize with the brand. Sometimes the right shade of smile makes all the difference." Xavier locked eyes with him. "Do you have proof?" Marcus nodded, placing a small USB drive on the table. Inside it, you'll find internal messages, staff training templates, notes from team meetings, and even an audio clip of Preston saying, "It's not that we're racist, We're just discriminating based on customer experience. Xavier picked up the USB drive, but didn't pocket it right away. He left it on the table, between them, like a silent agreement waiting to be acknowledged. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Marcus gave a quiet laugh. "Of course. But I'm more afraid of what happens if I stay silent, if there's another mother like yours standing at the host stand, politely rejected, without ever knowing why." A moment of stillness passed between them, no explanation needed, no pity exchanged. Back at Sterling HQ, Internal Investigations Office. Valerie had built a full-scale monitoring system, real-time social media response mapping, behavioral analytics on reservation patterns, and a blacklist of names flagged as off-brand. On the wall, email chains were pieced together like a mind map. Preston at the center, faint links reaching toward shareholders, PR firms, and even a prominent blogger who'd been paid by the restaurant to craft an image of elevated luxury for young white elites. "I don't want revenge," Xavier said slowly. "I want this system to collapse under the weight of the very logic it was built upon." Valerie looked up. "So what's the next step?" Xavier walked over to the timeline board. He picked up a marker and circled one name, Charlotte Langford, daughter of the second-largest investor after Sterling Group and a frequent guest at Highgrove, promoted as a brand ambassador. Start with her. Every PR contract, every gala appearance, every shady media payout. I want everything, and I want to know how many perfectly toned smiles were orchestrated to make her shine. 10:14 p.m., 45th floor, Sterling Equity Group. This was no longer a financial nerve center. It had become a command post for retaliation. The tension in the room was thick, as if the sound itself was being drawn toward the center screen, where a sprawling network diagram glowed, lines, names, titles, timestamps, and locations, each red node pulsing like diseased arteries leading to one infected heart. Highgrove Terrace. Valerie Chen stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, her pale gray suit crisp and immaculate. But her eyes, reflecting the screen's cold light, burned with steel and fire. "We've tracked Preston Klein across 3 restaurant groups over 8 years, she said. All 3 had at least 2 internal accusations of discrimination against black guests. None ever made it past internal handling. Xavier stood on the opposite side, silent. He didn't have to speak. His stance, solid as bronze, hand resting lightly on the walnut conference table, eyes locked on the screen, told everyone in the room that this fight had grown far beyond a cancelled dinner. Valerie tapped a key. A stream of photos appeared. Internal complaints, emails labeled "No action," and a note. Guest does not align with restaurant's visual identity. Reassigned. Maintain protocol for similar cases. Visual, Xavier repeated, voice low enough to hush the room. We are being defined by their idea of visual. Marcus Reed, the only person in the room not in a suit, leaned forward in his hoodie, hand warming around a cup of cold coffee. He nodded and pulled out his phone. "Here," Marcus said, holding up his screen. Screenshots of internal texts between managers. The language is worse. Everyone leaned in. "Tonight's VIP is Langley's daughter. Make sure no dark skins near the windows. B. Lawton prefers an open vibe. You know what that means." Valerie looked up at Xavier. "Do you need more?" "No," Xavier replied, then paused, considering. "But I need to prove this isn't an isolated case." Valerie nodded. Elena McBride just reached out. She was an assistant manager at Highgrove last year. Quit suddenly. Personal reasons. But she left a note for Marcus. Preston made her change 3 black guests' reservations in a week. When she protested, he said, "Visual aesthetic isn't a moral issue." The room fell silent. Then Xavier said, "Find her. Meet her. No pressure. Just tell her. She's not alone, and this time, no one gets forced out." Marcus nodded. "I'll go. She's in Katy. Maybe I'll have a better shot." "Take a lawyer," Xavier added, "and a protection agent. No one lays a hand on her." Just then, a soft notification chimed. Valerie stepped to the tablet on the table. An email had just arrived from the internal comms team. The press had started asking questions. An investigative reporter from the Houston Herald was probing complaints from former Highgrove diners, especially those who'd had last-minute table changes. "Do we respond?" she asked. "Not yet," Xavier answered. "Let them dig. Truth holds more weight when it comes from multiple sources." Marcus looked over. "But what if they bring up your mother?" Xavier turned. His eyes were steel dipped in ice. "If they bring up my mother," he said, each word cutting like a blade, "they won't just face the woman they denied. They'll face the man who owns 51% of the system they thought was untouchable." No one spoke, but the air in the room shifted, slow, resolute, like a warship swiveling its cannons toward the enemy. Everyone there understood. From this moment on, the mission was no longer a reaction. It was a declaration, a system built on privilege, bias, and invisible protocols was beginning to crack, not from screaming, but from coordinated silence, documented facts, and unrelenting resolve. Outside, Houston was cloaked in darkness. But on the 45th floor of Sterling Equity Group, the lights were coming on. Piece by piece, person by person, story by story, like sparks ready to ignite a rotting foundation. 7:12 a.m., CEO office, Sterling Equity Group. A typical morning in Houston begins with honking horns and hurried footsteps. But on the 45th floor of Sterling Equity Group, silence reigned. No phone rings, no keyboard clicks. Even the receptionist whispered, as if the whole building held its breath before launch. Valerie Chen entered with a sealed black case. Without a single wasted word, she set it on Xavier Sterling's walnut desk and said, "One touch on the screen, one command, and the whole system will unravel." Xavier didn't sit. He stood by the glass wall, white shirt sleeves rolled high, no jacket, no tie. The morning light glinted off the veins in his forearms, pulsing with quiet fury. At that moment he wasn't a billionaire. He was a son about to answer the silent slap his mother endured. "Do the papers have the redacted version?" he asked, without turning. "3 of them," Valerie confirmed. "Houston Herald, the Tribune, and an independent platform led by you, the Highgrove Ledger." An internal analysis disguised as a customer experience audit. Inside it were things that would make the entire Houston F&B industry tremble. 34 documented instances of guests being reseated for not fitting the image. A customer list coded by race and social media influence. Internal messages between Preston Klein and Bianca Lawton. Make sure there's no African element in the Friday night frame. Xavier tapped the button, and the world began to move. 9:05 a.m., Preston Klein's office, Highgrove Terrace. Preston stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his Windsor knot and smoothing his cuff. Movements honed by hundreds of evenings hosting Houston's Elate. Tonight was set to be another glittering Friday, the silent gala with investors flying in from Boston, and of course, Bianca Lawton would be there, same window seat, same wine tailored to her palate. His phone buzzed. A message from Bianca. Houston Herald is asking about the Lucille Sterling incident. You think they're onto something? Preston smirked, typing back. I've handled storms worse than this. Let me take care of it. But 15 minutes later, the storm arrived. And it wasn't a storm. It was a tsunami. 9:23 a.m. The Internet. The homepage of the Houston Herald flashed a headline, Quiet Discrimination at a Luxury Restaurant, High Grove Terrace and its guest screening by race. Twitter erupted. Reddit exploded. Instagram turned into a war zone. Hashtags flooded every corner of the web. Highgrove Gate. No seat for Lucille. Who deserves the window? The outrage didn't just come from the black community. It came from anyone who had ever been deemed not on brand. 10:21 a.m., 45th floor, Sterling Equity Group. Valerie scrolled through a real-time media spread analysis, voice low and steady. We're spreading 3 times faster than projected, and there's more. What now? Bianca Lawton just called me. She wants to meet, in private. Xavier looked up. A cold smile touched his lips. She's not sure what side we're on, is she? Valerie answered. Exactly. And that's what scares her. Xavier set the tablet down. Tell her I'll meet, but not at the office. I want her to step into a space where privilege doesn't work. 3 p.m. A Montrose Cafe, back left corner. Bianca walked in wearing oversized black sunglasses, an oversized Chanel tote, and perfume strong enough to overpower the espresso in the air. Xavier was already seated. Gray turtleneck sweater, no label, no entourage, no authority, only eyes sharp enough to slice through armor. Mr. Sterling, Bianca smiled as she sat. I'm guessing. You know something? Xavier set down his espresso. I know enough for you to stop smiling. Bianca removed her sunglasses and leaned forward. We're both adults, Xavier. We both know. Scandals like this help no one, especially not people trying to push development permits through North Houston. Xavier smiled faintly, nodding. Sterling Meadows, I know, and I know who's been holding up the approval. So let's talk like partners. No. Xavier's eyes held hers. You're not a partner. You're a variable, and I'm giving you a choice. Go public or go isolated. Bianca clenched her bag strap. Threats don't suit you, and discrimination never suited my mother. Xavier leaned back. A message alert dinged. Bianca glanced at her phone. Her face paled instantly. A clip was going viral on TikTok and Reels. Preston Klein, caught on internal video during a staff meeting. If some old black woman wants to sit by the window, that's her problem, not ours. 9 seconds, enough to burn down a brand. Bianca stood so fast, her chair tipped. Xavier didn't follow. He just spoke one final line, quiet as breath, heavy as judgment. You just heard the first crack of your system. Don't try patching it with money. 7:03 a.m., 46th floor, Sterling Equity Group headquarters. A light rain swept across Houston, as if the sky was finally trying to cleanse the city of years of hidden grime. Inside Sterling Equity's central war room, not a word was spoken. Only the LED wall quietly assembling a full timeline of events, from Lucille Sterling's phone call to the incident at High Grove, leading up to the explosive video of Preston Klein, had ignited a crisis no one could deny anymore. Xavier Sterling stood, eyes locked on the final image on the screen, customer trust plummeting, the hashtag number sign, no seat for Lucille. Trending #1 across Texas, and CNN's headline that morning. Segregation in fine dining, Is the system of privilege collapsing? Valerie, Xavier said, his voice eerily calm. Did he agree? Valerie Chen nodded. Marcus Reed just confirmed, and Elena McBride has signed on as a witness. She's now represented by a third-party legal team. Security, reinforced for both. No one's going to touch them. Xavier nodded. His eyes carried no hint of vengeance, only a deep, resolute stillness, as if he were dragging an entire system into the light, with the kind of icy composure it had never dreamed would confront it. "It's time to go public," he said, turning. "I'll speak, not as a CEO, as the son of Lucille Sterling." 10 a.m. Press conference, Sterling Group headquarters. The press room was packed. Reporters from every major outlet were present. Cameras clicked. Microphones lined the podium. The room buzzed until Xavier stepped up. Then silence. He didn't wear an expensive suit, no company pin, just a gray shirt and a deep purple scarf, his mother's favorite color. He looked around, then began. 2 weeks ago, a 67-year-old woman, a retired nurse who worked through a pandemic, who raised a son on her own through a world that didn't always see her worth, was denied service at a restaurant where she thought she belonged. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand privilege. She just wanted to sit at the table her son had reserved 3 weeks in advance, for her birthday. Xavier paused. A few reporters bowed their heads. She was turned away because of her skin color, because she didn't fit the restaurant's image. But what the people who made that decision didn't know is that she was my mother, and I am the majority shareholder of that restaurant. A wave of murmurs spread. Xavier raised a hand. "I'm not here to lecture morality. I'm here to expose a system that operated on discrimination and hid behind the excuse of high-end exclusivity. And I'm here to announce that as of today, I have terminated Preston Klein from his position as general manager of Highgrove Terrace. In addition, the entire executive staff will be subject to an independent audit by an outside agency." Cameras flashed non-stop. The restaurant will close temporarily to restructure its policies, its customer evaluation system, and its reservation practices. All discriminatory procedures, implicit or explicit, will be abolished. And furthermore, he turned directly to the live-stream camera, "I am renaming the restaurant. From today on, Highgrove Terrace will be known as Lucille's Window, so that no one will ever have to stand outside the glass and wonder if they're worthy of sitting inside." Applause erupted, then swelled, then roared. 3:43 p.m. Preston Klein's office. Preston sat in silence, the screen in front of him displaying his termination email, media footage, and a final note from Sterling's legal department. "Leave your keys on the desk. Security will escort you from the building." He muttered, "All over a table." But even he knew it was never just about a table. The new restaurant was still under renovation. But that night, in a modest space draped in construction tarps, Xavier welcomed the first guests. His mother, Marcus Reed, Elena McBride, and every staff member who had ever been discriminated against under Preston's management. They dined at makeshift tables. On the wall hung a draft of the new interior design, panels of color representing multicultural inclusion. On the table sat a single card, "No window will ever be closed again." Lucille looked around, then turned to her son. "You did something most people thought was impossible." Xavier held her hand. "I only did what the world should have done a long time ago. The Houston morning sky was soft and clear, but outside the former Highgrove Terrace, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. A small group of reporters had been camped out since dawn, cameras pointed at the glass facade gleaming in the sun. One handwritten sign, still taped to a stanchion from the night before, read boldly, "This window belongs to dignity, not to privilege." Inside, Xavier Sterling stood in the main hall, flanked by Marcus Reed, Valerie Chen, and Alexis Porter, the new manager he had appointed after Preston's dismissal. The table by the window, the one Lucille Sterling should have sat at on her birthday, had been cleared, draped in a pristine white cloth. A vase of white orchids stood at its center. The VIP chair, still facing the street, seemed to be waiting silently. "Are you sure about this?" Valerie asked softly, tension in her voice. "Never been more sure," Xavier replied. "Today we're not just reopening a restaurant. We're reopening a door that people tried to keep shut forever." Marcus handed him a small brass plaque. The engraving gleamed under the morning light. "Lucille's window, reserved in honor of every soul ever told, you don't belong here." Xavier held the plaque in his hands, and for a moment his eyes glistened. "Not from weakness, B." "Are you sure your mother wants to see this?" Alexis asked softly. Xavier nodded. "My mother doesn't need an apology. She needs to know. Her dignity is not something that can be bargained." 9:15 Local news broadcast. A TV reporter stood in front of Highgrove, where dozens of Houstonians had gathered on their own. Some wore office attire, others wore aprons or work jackets. There was no clear common thread, except for the eyes looking through the large glass pane. "We're here because my mother, too, was once pushed away from a fine dining seat," one middle-aged woman shared. "No one filmed it, but today, at least one story is being told." 10 a.m., doors open. Lucille Sterling entered. She wore the same deep purple dress from that night, but this time her eyes held no hesitation. Her steps were steady, as though the room had always known the sound of her arrival. Everyone in the hall stood. No one spoke. There was no need, no slogans, only reverence. Xavier offered his arm and guided his mother to the window-side table. She saw the small plaque. She read it, and paused for a long time. Behind her, Valerie gently placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. He had quietly begun wiping his tears. Lucille reached out and touched the edge of the chair. Sunlight from the window lit her face, serene, but carved in granite. "We don't need revenge," she said, her voice soft yet echoing through the room. "We just need doors that no longer close." She sat, and applause followed, slow at first, then rising like waves, not for fame, but because a seat had been returned to dignity. Xavier's inbox lit up like a war zone. Subject lines screamed in all caps, flooding his screen with urgent response needed, immediate interview request, and even anonymous warnings, an avalanche of pressure from both media and the shadows that lurked behind it. Valerie Chen rushed in, holding a freshly printed email marked "Priority." Her expression was razor-sharp with intensity. Lawton Group just issued a public statement. They're calling the entire Highgrove situation a disinformation campaign engineered by an individual with personal motives, trying to manipulate public opinion for private gain. She paused, eyes locking with Xavier's. "They didn't name you, but the document points to you without needing to." Xavier clenched his jaw. He quietly pulled out a chair and sat, his posture calm but predatory, like a lion sensing the first move from the other side. No surprise. This was the move they had to make. And there's more, Valerie continued, her voice lowering. 3 housing projects proposed by Sterling Group in West Houston have just had their zoning approvals suspended. Special committees cited review of social impact and long-term community considerations. The sponsors behind those objections are directly tied to Lawton-funded investment arms. Xavier stood. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, gazing out as downtown Houston spread below like a model city, gleaming, but in his eyes, a battlefield, a place where towers hid the layers of power that always rewrote the rules to serve themselves. "They're attacking the roots," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "And when they start squeezing with zoning and regulation, that means they know they're losing." 3:30 p.m. Analysis room. Sterling HQ. The room was dark. On the big screen, Marcus Reed played the latest footage gathered by the independent investigation team. Preston Klein appeared again, this time at another restaurant, nearly 40 miles from Highgrove, owned by the same Lawton chain. During an internal meeting, he was directing new seating arrangements for an upcoming event. Guests who are Black or Asian should be seated near the kitchen or side room. VIPs need to maintain optimal visual branding. Whiter, the better, Preston said clearly, making no effort to hide from the concealed camera. Marcus turned to the legal advisors. "This proves it's not an isolated incident. This is a system." Xavier folded his hands behind his back. "Not just Highgrove, but the entire chain and possibly the whole service ecosystem Lawton controls. Send all footage to the federal legal team. I want a multi-agency investigation launched. Civil rights and economic fraud combined." 6:10 p.m. Highgrove Terrace. Tonight was unlike any other. No more wine swirling under candlelight for the elite. No more smirking laughter from people who believed they were the center of the universe. Highgrove Terrace was full, but not with the usual crowd. It was filled with everyday people, from every walk of life and every skin tone, who come to witness the rebirth of a symbol. Xavier entered with his mother, Lucille Sterling. This time, no one stopped her. No one stood in their way. They walked straight into the main hall, where the spotlight belonged to no one, and therefore to everyone. Lucille took the microphone. She stood at the center, her voice low, warm, but full of weight. "I did not come here, and meanwhile," Marcus Reed said from the other end of the table, "3 of our housing development projects have been put on hold, all by committees with deep ties to Lawton-backed funds." Xavier wasn't surprised. "They're building walls. What about us?" Valerie turned the display. "We have a breach. The independent investigation team just sent footage from another internal meeting at a restaurant in the same chain as Highgrove, 40 miles away." The screen lit up. Preston Klein appeared again, his voice crystal clear. "Black guests should be seated near the kitchen, out of media-facing areas. Keep the prime spaces for guests who enhance the visual brand." No one spoke for several seconds. Then Xavier said slowly, "I don't just want Preston removed. I want the entire system that held him up dismantled." 10:45 a.m. Federal Prosecutor's Office, Midtown. A 200-page report was submitted, packed with evidence, video footage, internal messages, and witness statements from multiple locations within the restaurant chain. The complaint combined 2 legal fronts: systemic racial discrimination and fraudulent business practices. Based on this, The lead prosecutor said, if these findings are verified, Lawton Group won't just face civil penalties. This could trigger a criminal investigation into orchestrated systemic discrimination. Xavier nodded, his face unreadable, but Valerie, standing beside him, could see the tension in his clenched fists. 6 p.m., Highgrove Terrace, Lucille's window reopening. Event: there were no ball gowns tonight, no candlelight dinners for the socially elite. In its place, the air of a community gathering. People didn't come to dine. They came to witness change. Lucille Sterling stepped onto the small stage in the center of the restaurant. Her hair was pinned neatly, her deep purple dress simple yet commanding. The lights framed her not with glamour, but with reverence. Not long ago, she began, I stood in this very place, not in honor but in silence. A pause. But I'm not here today to revisit that moment. I'm here to open a window, one that I believe, if it was ever closed to someone, should be opened again, for many more. Applause filled the room, not just clapping, connection, shared breath, shared purpose. Xavier stood at the back. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to speak. He simply looked at his mother, the woman who raised him with the hands of a nurse and the heart of a warrior, now opening what an entire system had tried to seal shut. Opportunity. And from that window the first light of a long fight shone down upon Houston. The sun was only just breaking over the high rises to the east, casting a pink glow across the Sterling Tower. Inside a compact strategy room, Xavier Sterling stood before the glass wall, arms folded. His face was no longer hardened by pressure. It was calm, cold, and ready. Valerie Chen entered, carrying a new report from the asset tracking team. The third player just surfaced. His name is Mason Firth, former strategic media consultant for Lawton Hospitality. Xavier listened without a word. Valerie placed a USB on the table. Inside, internal emails, handwritten notes, and a series of audio files from conference calls. In one, Mason clearly says, "We can't have questionable faces in the frame. A solo black diner is a branding risk." Xavier picked up the USB just as Marcus Reed entered. It's not just Preston, not just Bianca. Their entire media and marketing structure was engineered to enforce a visual hierarchy, polished on the surface, discriminatory underneath. "And we're about to shatter that glass," Valerie said, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she prepared a release package for the legal comms team. 10 a.m., coordinated press release. At 3 major outlets, Houston, New York, and Chicago, Sterling Group published a coordinated document drop. The report didn't just name Lawton Group. It mapped an entire ecosystem: discrimination, image manipulation, and profiting from society's silence. Online, the hashtag #Glassgate began trending globally. The viral clip of Preston Klein resurfaced, and now white waiters, Asian students, minority families, and elderly people of color all had stories of windows closed to them. Now they were helping open them. 6 p.m. Sterling Equity Group headquarters. As the sun set, Xavier received a flagged email, a meeting request from the office of the governor of Texas. The opening line read, "We've reviewed the materials provided by Sterling Equity. It may be time for long-standing unwritten rules in hospitality to be simplified or eliminated." Valerie entered and saw Xavier still standing at the window. "Are you going to accept the meeting?" she asked. Xavier nodded. "This is just the beginning." The door closed behind him, and Lucille's window, once quietly shut, had now become a wide, bright view into the future. In a sound-insulated conference room, two senior FBI investigators were reviewing Lucille's window. When a black mother spoke up, the whole system trembled. "This is going front page," Valerie said. "The media narrative has shifted. No one's questioning our intent now." Xavier nodded. "Then it's time to ask the bigger question. Who allowed this to happen for over a decade?" Marcus laid a list before him. Many of these names are public officials, zoning board members, auditing directors. They either looked the other way or helped. Valerie tapped the screen. A list of zoning votes for luxury housing developments appeared. 80% showed links to gifts, donations, or private dinners hosted by the Lawton family. Xavier folded his arms. "We're about to hit the deepest levels of power." An emergency meeting was called, with Sterling Equity Group and the officials overseeing the suspended housing projects. Xavier was the first to speak. "We're not here to demand benefits for our company. We're here to compel the system to take a hard look at itself. Why are the ones who speak the truth silenced? Why are equity-driven projects abandoned by hands hidden in the dark?" A heavy silence blanketed the room. Then, the head of the City Development Board stood. "We've reviewed the materials, and if this is a tear in the fabric, we're not going to let it unravel." For the first time in weeks, Xavier returned to the place where it all began. But Highgrove was no longer the same. The dining room welcomed people of all kinds. Staff came from every race and background. A large framed portrait hung by the entrance, Lucille Sterling, smiling gently in front of a wide-open window. He sat at the table by the window. A group of servers approached, and before he could order, they spoke in unison. "Thank you, sir, for opening that window." Xavier didn't answer. He just smiled. Outside, Houston was still waking up. But inside Lucille's window, something closer to a new dawn had begun. The front of the restaurant was flooded with reporters. Media vans lined the curb. A new banner not yet flascured above Highgrove Terrace read, "Lucille's Window Grand Reopening." Xavier Sterling arrived with Lucille and Valerie. He wasn't in a suit, just a rolled-sleeve shirt and khaki pants. Lucille wore a deep purple scarf around her neck, a quiet emblem of meaning. This wasn't a press conference, it was a statement. "Every guest deserves to be seated with dignity," Xavier said into the microphone, his voice not loud but resolute. Lucille stepped beside her son. She offered a simple smile. "This window wasn't opened for me. It was opened for anyone who ever thought they were never seen." That day's attendees included former servers, delivery drivers, and past patrons who had once been denied. Each was welcomed inside the restaurant. There was no VIP list, no partitions. The window opened, and for the first time in years, Highgrove Terrace welcomed everyone who had once believed they'd never be invited to the head of the table. Valerie walked in with a fresh article from the Tribune. Its headline read, "No more singular frames. Sterling is redefining hospitality." Xavier read it once, then set it down. He looked out through the same glass wall as he had that night. He walked into Highgrove as Darius Wilkins. But today, he wasn't walking in alone. Beyond that window, Houston still shimmered, but within the machinery of power and privilege, a new frame had emerged, a frame named Lucille, and it would never be locked again. Inside the central operations room, Xavier Sterling and Valerie Chen sat before a detailed map marking fine dining establishments across the United States. Each circle represented a site now on the watch list. where anonymous reports of discrimination had begun to surface. Chicago, San Francisco, Charlotte, Valerie listed, and just in Denver, a delivery driver was denied access to the back entrance because of his skin color. Xavier nodded. The more voices rise, the less chance there is of turning back. He stood before the glass wall, the city still not fully awake beyond it. In his hand was the blueprint for a new initiative, the Lucille Network, an alliance to monitor, expose, and support cases of discrimination in hospitality and service industries. 10:30 a.m., Sterling HQ Auditorium, weekly briefing. Today's audience wasn't just investors. It included nonprofit leaders, students of color, cultural scholars, and local restaurant owners. Lucille Sterling sat in the front row, holding a copy of Voices from the Margins, a collection of stories from those who'd been pushed aside. Xavier stepped to the podium. No formal introduction, no fanfare. I'm not the leader of this movement. I'm just someone listening to the voice of the woman who once told me, "There is no door that won't open if you're brave enough to push." He glanced at Lucille. She nodded once, calm, assured, like a general witnessing a turning point in history. Starting today, any restaurant joining the Lucille Network must commit to transparency in guest records, pricing policies, and service standards. Every baseless refusal, every forgotten name, will be recorded. 1 p.m. Lucille's window, Highgrove Terrace. Lucille led a group of students from the University of Houston into the restaurant. She didn't just share stories. She taught them how to sit with respect, how to listen to each other, and, most importantly, how to recognize when they were being treated unfairly. A digital wall displayed portraits of those who had spoken up during the Highgrove case. Beneath them was a quote, "For the first time in my life, I knew I could restart my own heartbeat, with dignity and with a defiance that refused to stay hidden." And those who restarted their heartbeats with justice no longer faced doors that only opened halfway. Dawn painted pink across the glass towers of downtown Houston. But inside Xavier Sterling's office, the only light came from a computer screen, where internal news feeds flooded with reactions to the relaunch of Highgrove Terrace under its new name, Lucille's Window. Valerie walked in, holding a black coffee. She didn't need to ask. She knew Xavier hadn't slept. "Reaction?" he asked, eyes still fixed on the screen. "Beyond expectations," she replied. "The press is calling it the first institutionalized model for equitable service in Houston. Other restaurants are reaching out, asking for help retraining their staff." Xavier stayed silent. He opened a new tab, an unread email, the subject line, "Apology from the Lawton Group Board." "It finally came," he said softly. Valerie leaned in to read. The letter was an official apology from the Board of Lawton Hospitality, acknowledging operational wrongdoing at the former Highgrove and agreeing to remove Bianca Lawton from all executive roles across their system. "It's not justice," Xavier said, "but it's a beginning." 9:45 a.m. Main hall, Lucille's window. Lucille Sterling wore a cream-colored blouse, her hair pinned neatly, pearl earrings gleaming, Xavier's first birthday gift to her after becoming CEO. She wasn't there to inspect the restaurant. She was there as a reminder. This was her house. Marcus waited in the lobby. "Ms. Lucille," he greeted, "you're just in time." A group of high school students from the 5th Ward booked a table to research the history of discrimination in dining. They were hoping you'd share your story. Lucille smiled gently. "If they're ready to listen, I'm ready to speak. 2:30 p.m. Office of the Houston Mayor Xavier stood beside the mayor and representatives from the city's Human Rights Council during a live press conference. On the podium, the Lucille's Window logo appeared alongside a new slogan, "Service doesn't discriminate. Only we choose how to treat each other." What happened at Highgrove wasn't just a stain, Xavier said to the cameras. It was a symptom of an old system trained to function through exclusion. But today, Houston sends a message. We don't exclude, we evolve. Applause echoed through the hall. 6:45 p.m. Rooftop of Sterling HQ. The evening wind was soft. Valerie and Marcus stood beside Xavier, each holding a drink, juice, wine. No one spoke for a long time. They simply looked out over the city as it lit up, tower by tower, and above that glowing skyline, a window once sealed shut had now become a beacon, and its name was Lucille. "I used to think I'd be an assistant forever," Valerie spoke up, "but today, I no longer see myself as someone standing behind." "Me too," Marcus added, "from someone Preston looked down on, to someone unlocking doors for others to walk through." Xavier looked at them, eyes shimmering, but his voice remained steady. "None of us were given this role. We reclaimed it." A message arrived. Lucille sent, "Don't forget dinner, son. That schoolgirl wants to give you the story she's writing about a locked door and the man who opened it." Xavier chuckled, murmuring, "Maybe we should publish that story." Houston at night, but inside Sterling HQ, all lights remained on because the journey hadn't stopped. Lucille's Window was no longer just a restaurant. It was a symbol, and behind that door, a new city was gradually forming. A week after Lucille's Window reopened, Xavier Sterling stepped into the grand hall of the Education Consortium with a plan over 60 pages in hand. Above the podium was the new slogan he had drafted with the city council. "Equality doesn't start with a slogan, but with structure." In the auditorium, nearly 200 representatives from businesses, restaurants, hotels, service centers, and educational organizations were present. Valerie Chen launched the presentation slides, beginning the announcement of the initiative, the Open Door Standard, a new set of standards funded by Sterling Equity, aiming to change how the service industry treats diversity and fairness. "We've seen what happens when a system closes itself off to people just because of their background, skin color, or name," Xavier said, his voice resonating through the microphone. "Now it's time to open another door, not because we're forced to, but because it's the right thing to do." 10:45. Houston City Council office. Lucille Sterling sat on an old leather sofa, holding a cup of tea, listening to each proposal presented by the council. She didn't speak, but whenever someone turned to ask her opinion, she simply smiled and nodded gently. No need for speeches, because her presence was proof that change could become reality. She only said one sentence at the end of the meeting. "The first door has opened, but I hope it's not the only one." 1400. Dallas, Texas. Valerie was present at the headquarters of a high-end restaurant chain under investigation after some employees reported covert discriminatory policies. She didn't come as an investigator. She came to share how Lucille's Window had been restructured, from internal operations to culture to customer data management. "We didn't just rename the restaurant," Valerie said. "We changed the perspective on who has the right to sit near the window." A young manager in the back row stood up, hands trembling slightly. And if we want to start over, but don't have Xavier Sterling, what then? Valerie smiled. You don't need Xavier Sterling. You just need to believe that no one is born to be hidden from the light. 1830. Lawn in front of Lucille's window. Marcus Reed and a group of students from TSU University were setting up a small community information board where stories of racial discrimination that had occurred in the service industry would be recounted, not to condemn, but to remember and learn. Lucille approached from behind, carrying a water jug and cold towels. You all are working as if it's not hot, she said, smiling kindly. Marcus handed her a folding chair. We think we have to work quickly because we've waited too long already. Lucille nodded, eyes looking up at the wooden board where the phrase, "Every seat tells a story," was hand-painted. She sat down, gently placing her hand over her heart. Yes, and this time, we won't be silent anymore. 2100. 46th floor, Sterling Equity. HQ, Xavier sat alone, lying at the electronic map with glowing points. Each point was a restaurant, hotel, or service establishment that had submitted an application to join the open door standard. Valerie entered without knocking. Good news from Atlanta. The Winslow chain will implement the new standard starting next month. Xavier nodded. So that's 4 cities. And it's not stopping. Valerie handed him an envelope from a little girl in 5th Ward. Xavier opened it. Inside was a school notebook page, handwritten clumsily. I want to open a restaurant called Grandma's Table someday, where everyone gets to sit in the best spot, just like you did for Grandma. Xavier finished reading and said nothing. He just looked out at Houston sleeping outside. But inside him, something new had just awakened. The next chapter wouldn't be about a restaurant anymore, but about an entirely new generation, learning not to bow before doors that were once locked. Every morning at Lucille's window now resembled a ritual. Inside the warm space, young staff members set tables, wiped glasses, carry baskets of lavender seeds to the small counter. The piano was delicately filled with the sound of keys being practiced by part-time art students. Lucille Sterling quietly walked past the tables, holding a ledger, not to manage, but to answer the question, who do we want to feel remembered today? At table number 4, she sat with an elderly Asian woman, guiding her through a series of legal aid forms regarding the rights of older workers. We have the right to manage the spaces we create, Valerie emphasized, but no one has the right to dictate who deserves to sit where. At 2:45 p.m., inside the 5th Ward Youth Center, Marcus Reed affixed a sign to the wall, Lucille's Legacy Club. This initiative connects under-resourced youth of color with the rituals of service, the culture of hospitality, and pathways to career development. No one gets left behind, Marcus stated, especially when we're strong enough to lead others forward. 8 p.m., under the soft glow of golden lights, on the terrace of Lucille's window, Xavier Sterling welcomed a group of entrepreneurs from Atlanta, Chicago, and San Diego. They had come to observe the restaurant model firsthand. Amidst congratulations and admiring glances, many prepared to implement the open-door standard in their own cities. Lucille approached, linking arms with her son. Remember when your friends came over, and your grandmother commented on one of them just because of his skin color? What did you say? Xavier chuckled. I said, if they don't open the door for us, we build a window. Lucille nodded. And now that window has become an entire building. High above, on the LED panel of the Sterling Equity Building, illuminated letters read, "Lucille's Window Foundation, where every seat starts a movement." Outside Lucille's window, a line formed under the early Houston sun. Each person held a small book, a handwritten letter, or simply bore a hopeful gaze, yearning for a chance to step inside. Within, Lucille Sterling rearranged tables and chairs, her eyes reflecting a lifetime dedicated to serving others. Valerie Chen entered, carrying the latest issue of the Wall Street Journal. On the cover, a photo captured Lucille's gentle smile as she sat by the window, with the transformed Highgrove Terrace in the background, now a symbol of the open door standard. "Mind if I rest this here?" Valerie smiled, placing the newspaper on the table. "We've been invited to speak at TEDx as part of a series on social equity in business." Lucille shook her head. "I just want these stories to reshape how we see one another." At 9:10 a.m., on the 46th floor of Sterling Equity Group, Xavier Sterling sat at the Grand Council table. Before him, an online map displayed over 120 new points of light across the United States. Businesses that had voluntarily adopted the open door standard in just 1 month. "I thought this battle would end when Preston Klein left Highgrove," Xavier remarked. "But it turns out that was just another starting point." Valerie nodded. "It's a generation of intellect, not just institutional change." At 2 p.m. in the Fifth Ward Youth Center, Marcus Reed conducted a free cooking class for black teenagers. Dried lavender bouquets adorned the walls, a subtle yet clear emblem of Lucille's window. "We're not just learning to cook," Marcus explained. "We're learning to choose who gets to sit by the window." By 5:45 p.m., on the school porch, Xavier and Lucille sat together on a bench. Children passed by, each greeted with smiles and gestures toward a door that had never been closed. "I think the seat by the window isn't really that important," Xavier mused. Lucille laughed. "Then why did you name the restaurant after it?" He looked at her. "Because I know the scariest thing is when someone sees you, even when you've been pushed out of the frame." Lucille gently squeezed her son's hand. Together, they watched the golden sunset in silence. At 9 p.m., inside Lucille's window, the golden lights glowed warmly. On the wall, a newly engraved inscription beside the window frame read, "A place that opens windows once thought reserved for a select few." The story has concluded, but the open door system is just beginning, because every seat carries a story, because no one is born to be hidden from the light. If you've ever been judged by your appearance, your background, or simply because you didn't fit someone's image, this story is for you. Lucille chose silence. Xavier chose to let the system speak. And behind that opening door, there might be a seat waiting for you to return. Lucille Sterling no longer waits in the hallway for a promised table. Xavier Sterling no longer seeks justice through reports, but through actions that touch the heart of an entire system. Valerie Chen, Marcus Reed, Elena McBride, and hundreds of others who once remained silent, now stand up, not for revenge, but to create a fairer world for those who will come after them. Lucille's window is no longer just the name of a reopened restaurant. It is a symbol of a door once closed by prejudice, now opened, not by power, but by humanity. This story begins with a dented table. It ends with thousands of seats. Where doors once seemed reserved for only a few, this is the place that opens them. The story has ended, but the open-door system is only beginning, because every seat holds a story, because no one is born to be hidden from the light. If you've ever been judged for your appearance, your background, or simply because you didn't fit someone's image, this story is for you. Lucille chose silence. Xavier chose to let the system speak. And behind that opening door, there just might be a seat waiting for you to return. Lucille Sterling no longer waits in the hallway for a table she was promised. Xavier Sterling no longer seeks justice through paperwork, but through actions that reach into the heart of an entire system. Valerie Chen, Marcus Reed, Elena McBride, and hundreds of others, those who once stayed silent, now stand up, not for revenge, but to build a fairer world for those who come after them. Lucille's window is no longer just the name of a reopened restaurant. It's a symbol of a door once shut by prejudice, now opened, not by power, but by people. This story began with a denied dinner table. It ends with thousands of seats prepared for dreams that never had a place to sit before. And if you're reading this, maybe you're the one meant to open the next door. You don't need to be a CEO. You don't need to have power. You just need the courage to step forward and say, no one should ever be pushed out of the light. If this story made your heart pause for a beat, if you believe that justice can begin with a table, if you believe this world can be kinder, fairer, if only we dare to speak the truth, then please subscribe to the channel, because here we don't tell stories just to entertain. We tell them to awaken belief, to open doors, and to remind you you are not alone. Tap the notification bell to follow the next story, where every glance, every decision, every voice has the power to change an entire system. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.